Virginia Beach, editor of the Coastal Conservation League newsletter, and today I'm talking with Dana Beach, the founder and director of the Conservation League, and Nancy Vinson, director of the League's Air, Water, and Public Health program. And we're going to discuss the League's 20 years of working to protect the air, water, and public health of South Carolina. South Carolina has more wetlands than all but a few of the states in the nation. We have 500,000 acres of saltwater marshes and then freshwater wetlands that are of global significance, like the Four-Hole Swamp. Give us, if you will, a few examples of what the Conservation League has done to protect the integrity of South Carolina's wetland resources.
Four-Hole Swamp is an internationally important wetland forest, and it's actually the largest cypress tupelo swamp that's not been cut in the world. But amazingly, the State Department of Health and Environmental Control, this seems to be a recurrent theme in these talks, issued a permit to allow a racetrack to be built right next to Four-Hole Swamp, literally on the border, on the edge of Four-Hole Swamp, and with all the attendant problems that racetracks would cause, including not only runoff, polluted runoff, and the like in terms of direct pollution, but also just the noise. The whole ambience of the area is so mystical and spiritual. When you're out there, you can hear nature, and the idea of having races going on regularly on the edge of the swamp was just almost unbelievable that they issued the permit. But we got involved and worked with Audubon and Norman Brunswick, and we ended up having to try to overturn the permit at the board level, and Nancy really led that effort and organized, and it was exciting.
It was exciting. I think that that may be the most the DHEC board members had heard from citizens on any one issue.
Arthur Ravenel, I think, described it before Congress as a cathedral.
Yes. And so we really rallied the troops, and people were outraged. We even had a cute editorial cartoon in the state paper on the issue, and lots of editorials, and people were just furious about it. And the DHEC board sent it back to their staff and said, you all didn't consider the cumulative impacts, you didn't look at noise, and we don't think you did the stormwater stuff correctly. And it was an amazing journey after that. It's been to the Supreme Court once, and the Supreme Court sent it back. It's still not finished after all these years. It's kind of still in limbo, so we have to really remain vigilant. You would think by now it would be done. But it was a real rallying call for citizens and people who care about gorgeous natural ecosystems.
And that brings to mind the salt marsh, which is another area that we have been involved for now 20 years. And South Carolina, as Virginia noted, has the fourth largest acreage of salt marsh in the nation, even though we're not a very big state. So in the midst of all this salt marsh, we have little marsh islands, hammocks some people call them, and they're disproportionately important to wildlife because they provide habitat for mammals, minks and otters, and of course we have plenty of raccoon habitat, but they provide raccoon habitat, and as well as nesting sites for really fairly threatened species like the painted bunnies.
Yes.
And other songbirds and migratory stopover for birds coming up, flying up to the Arctic to nest. So they're very important, and the pressure to find great waterfront property over the last 20 years has evolved to the point that people were buying these islands, wanting to put in bridges and build houses on them, some as small as 1/4 of an acre or less. And Nancy, again, was on the front line on that issue when we found out basically that the agency said, and actually they were correct in this respect, they did not have the regulations in place that were adequate to protect these islands from overdevelopment, from bridging. There are over 2,000 of them that didn't have bridges but could have. So we moved into the Marsh Island campaign.
Yeah, I remember we appealed the worst permit that came along, a long bridge to Park Island over in Mount Pleasant. And the agency staff, I mean, they had some regulations, and judges defer to agency judgment. They really could have denied these permits and should have, because they were supposed to consider public need. Well, is there a public need for a private developer to bridge across the public trust tidelands so he can maximize profits on developing a Marsh Island? I don't think so. But so we really had a tough time with that appeal. We were losing, and then we got to Judge Vic Rawl in the appeals court, and he overturned it. He said, obviously there's no public need for these things. You didn't consider the cumulative impacts. What if we have thousands of these bridges and the public trust marshland just becomes a network of roadways with massive development on these Marsh Islands? Runoff with stormwater runoff would have nowhere to go but right into the marsh, where it can damage, juvenile fish and shellfish. So we really were pushing for better regulations. Unfortunately, the Coastal Management Program staff was interested in weakening the regulations. We got the DHEC board to overturn that staff effort and strengthen the regulations, but the developers killed it. Wayne Beam and, and others killed the regulations at the legislative level. Fortunately, there was a change in leadership at the Coastal Management Program, and Carolyn Bolton appointed a committee of reasonable people to look at these regulations and come up with something that would be able to people could buy into and would pass the legislature. And Will Cleveland was then the Conservation League board chairman, served on that committee, and did a fabulous job. And Elizabeth Haygood kind of steered the whole effort as the chair of the DHEC board. And we got regulations that allow a few bridges to islands that are larger and closer to the mainland, but really prevent 95% of the bridges that we could have had without this regulation.
It is so easy, I think, to look at these marshes and just assume everything is going to stay the way it is now. And when you drive across the bridge to Johns Island, or you're in Beaufort or in Georgetown, and you see these magnificent expanses of marshes and these hummocks or islands in the middle of the marsh, it's almost, it's just too easy to be complacent about it. And the great thing about these regulations is we got ahead of the curve on it, and we're able to stave off huge problems, as you mentioned, runoff, loss of habitat, general just degradation of the landscape. It would have been a terrible thing, but today we're in pretty good shape with it.